I'd like to welcome you to my Thursday Bread History Seminar Workshop. I am broadcasting from my kitchen in Santa Cruz, California. My name is William Rubel. You can find my book, Bread, A Global History, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online sources, possibly also at your public library. I'm writing a larger bread history, and really this work in the seminar series is feeding into this new work that I'm writing. So thank you very much for watching. You can go to my Facebook group, Bread History in Practice, join the group. That's where you will get notifications of the live seminars, and also you will see what people are posting who have attended the seminar. If you want to make breads that are mentioned, then go to my website, williamrubel.com. I don't have all of the recipes from each of these seminars posted, but increasingly I do. So you should look there first in the category seminar. Now I always start with the same two slides. And so I'm going to do that now. So you know you're back because we're back to one of my inimitable drawings. Bread is an invention, like a chair, a car, a shoe, or a necklace. And it's really, really important concept. One can't say it enough. And think about it, I think, enough. That bread does not grow on trees. It is not an agricultural crop. Grain is the agricultural crop. And this crop is fully processed just in the same way that ore is processed to make metal, or wood is turned on a lathe. The tree is cut and processed into a product that we can use. So bread is an invention. Everything about the loaf is a product of culture. And today we're going to be talking about laws that actually determine how the bread is made, And when we look up at night, if I didn't get everybody unmuted, so if everybody could please mute yourselves, please. Pamela, you're still unmuted. Thank you. When you look up at the stars at night, if you're lucky enough on a clear night where you can see the Milky Way especially, there's lots of stars and lots of patterns in the stars that we humans have stories about. But there's what there isn't, and there's no story about, which is the recipe for the best bread. Because the recipe for the best bread is in our hearts. And I think a real subject of this ongoing lecture series on the history of bread is the history of changes in people's love for particular styles of bread. So today I'm talking about the Assize of bread, and I speak English. I think most of us in this group today, I think, are native English speakers. But it's really important to keep in mind that this set of regulations that described the manner in which bread was sold, the price of the bread, the way in which it was made, that developed in the 1100s and 1200s was not just English. There's still one person, I think, mute. If you could just make sure you're muted. Thank you. Oh, yeah, there we go. So it was also in Germany, in France, in Italy. So you should look this up in your own language if you speak another language, or if look it up. And if you're doing scholarship in English, we all need to move and look at these other other rules as well, not be totally Anglo-centric. But this Assize of bread, in one form or another, went from the late 1100s all the way to the US colonies, the British colonies in North America, and the early states. If you look up Assize for bread Virginia, you will find Assize tables. As I'm going to describe, the medieval version was replaced in 1706 by a new version under Queen Anne, and that is the version that we had in the early American states. For those of you who want to do research yourself, the laws are easy to find online. Go to the Wikipedia, and I recommend these three big authors, John Powell with one L, John Pechtman, and Samuel Skeet. They were writing in the 1600s, I think Skeet published in 1701. And these is really the source that everybody working, all the academics working on the history of bread, we all are using these sources. And you can get them from Google Books, archive.org, probably also Hathi Trust. They're in plain English, easy to read. I will say that if you bring up an edition and it's in black letter type, then get a later edition that has the type you're more familiar with. This is an excerpt from Jeek. For some reason, I'm getting an echo here. And I also, back. This is from Jeek. This is the kind of thing you can see. And so one thing about Jeek, and I really recommend this for Mark, for Jeff, and for some of you I know, and Michael, who are really interested
it's
in
fucking
in
Eventbrite. These are just idiots.
Okay, I'm sorry. I might need to unshare so I can get everybody muted. I'm going to unshare for a second. I'm going to get everybody muted.
They kept saying, oh, problem with the server.
There we go. Everybody is muted except hopefully me. And now I'm going to share the screen again. Okay, so when you read these texts, I just want to give one word of advice. Don't fall into the rabbit hole of trying to work out every single little detail. This talk today is largely going to be about what the Assize means, which I think will sort of help you, not fall into rabbit holes. And the only rabbit hole to fall into really are some of the nuances you can find, especially in Skeet, that might hint at nuance within this bread. One difficulty that I'm going to help you with right now is that you'll have statements said, bread made into a simnel less than the wastel by 2 shillings, 2s. And they're using a long S in this period, so some of these F's are really S's. You just learn how to read it. Is 2 shillings. The weight of money was real weight. So a pound sterling was a pound of sterling silver. Okay, so 2 shillings works out to about 36 grams. 1 shilling was 18.65 grams. So that's a hint for you. This is what a period table looks like. They're very hard to read, so it's a lot easier to read them in the form of those texts, Powell, Skeet, and Jake that I mentioned. However, this is from Powell, and just because it's printed in a book in 1623, don't assume it is correct. So you have to always think, what does this mean? How would I make that bread? Try to engage with numbers. I know a lot of people, you look at these numbers and it's just like, it doesn't mean anything. In this case, the Troy weight and the avoirdupois rate are reversed. So it's the Troy pound, there's more Troy ounces in a Troy pound. So it's 12 Troy pounds and 11 avoirdupois. So this is reversed. And furthermore, if you look up these conversions online, you'll find they aren't quite right. There could be some weird technical thing that something was being measured in money weight and it began to deviate from the actual weight. So I just suggest always, try to really think, what does this mean? Now, the Assize addresses a fundamental problem, and it's a structural problem that goes back to the Neolithic period, and it goes back to the pact that we humans made with ourselves when we collectively decided, and it wasn't, of course, just in Southwest Asia where we switched over to grain, but that's where we switched to bread grains. we decided, look, this gathering food is fabulous. We only have to work 4 hours a day. We're kind of styling in terms of human lifestyles. But it's hard for the population to grow. It's hard for us to expand. It's hard for us to create a complex society as a hunter-gatherer. So we morphed into farmers. The problem with farming is, instead of depending on 125 taxa as we did as hunter-gatherers, we now depend on a few taxa, and they're ones that we grow ourselves. And we also switched from browsing through, in this Garden of Eden and sort of walking through nature and eating this, that, and the other thing, to just saying, we're going to get the bulk of our calories from grain. And there is a big problem there, because grain crops are not reliable from year to year. So this are the wheat prices, changes in wheat prices in England from 12.25 to 13, whatever it is. I can't see, my face is over at 05 or 06. And what you'll see is up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, okay? And those are big changes. You've got, this is based on the price of a bushel of wheat. So you're down, you can see with the first one, it's less, it's like 0.29, 0.30 shillings per bushel. And then it gets up, you see it going up almost to, to 0.9. And then you've got ones that are, that are higher. Up, down, up, down. And this is a problem. Now, this is American grain prices in the last, since 1960 to 2020. It's just the same. Up, down, up, down, up, down. And look at those swings. $12 a bushel and $2 a bushel in 1960. $12 a bushel up in 2010 and back down to $4 a bushel in something like 2016 or something. It's amazing. It's amazing. And this is the whole look of English bread prices, wheat prices from 1205, when the Assize, beginning of the Assize period, to 1706. And again, up, down, up, down, up, down. So when the Assize started, it took 12 pennies to buy a quarter of wheat. And that is the unit in the Assize that the baker buys. A quarter of wheat, it's 512 troy pounds, 446 or something, avoirdupois pounds, which is what we use. So when it was 12 pennies a pound, 12 pennies a pound, you could just take, the amount of silver, and these were silver pennies, and you'd get yourself this 512 pounds of grain. But already by 1295, it took 12 shillings. Now, I have these Georgian forks. I looked up the silver content, and these Georgian forks within a few grams are the weight of 12 shillings, 12 silver shillings. So then already you have this massive inflation. I mean, it's a factor of 20. There's 20 shillings to a penny, 20 pennies to a shilling. And you can see the fluctuation here. In 1314 and 1316, the quarter was selling for 21 shillings a quarter. And the number 17 on the right, that is the troy ounce for the white bread, was 17 ounces troy. You can see it's about 16 ounces avoirdupois, about a pound. But in 1319, so only 4 years later, it's down to 6 shillings, and you're getting 61 ounces of bread. You're getting, a 4-pound loaf, if I'm doing the math. But you're getting a huge amount more. So what's really important about the Assize is it's not actually controlling the price of bread. It's not keeping the price of bread from going up and down. But what it is doing is it is keeping you from being overcharged during times of stress. Now, the Assize is, of course, not invented in England in the 1100s. The Assize or bread regulation is ancient, because this problem of how do we deal with these fluctuating prices was a problem of long standing. So just looking back, I don't know anything about this, so this is like research that that we need to do as a community. So I know nothing about Harappa, which was the huge civilization in the Indus Valley that was bread-based at the same time as Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, we know from Uruk that it was a command economy. Soviet economists love studying Uruk because they said, wow, 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 look, there's communism right there in the world's, one of the world's first big cities. And that was a theocracy, and the church, the temple, organized the growing. They had cuvées, they told you what to grow, they took your grain, they put it in a big warehouse, and they redistributed it. So that's one way to even out, to make sure that the society saves the wheat, so good years, bad years balance, and nobody starves. In Egypt, kind of similar thing, although it was run by the state, by the pharaoh, who also, of course, was a religious figure. State farms, he grew everything, you worked for the state, he harvested everything. I don't know how the grain market worked, so I have to learn that before the talk in a couple of weeks. But people were paid in the form of bread. When you worked on the pyramid or whatever it is you were working on, harvesting the grain, you did get paid in the form of bread and beer. So that was another way of dealing with these fluctuations. I know nothing about ancient Greece. Does anybody here know of any bread regulations or control in Greece? Okay. In Rome, they had something called the annona. They were heavily, heavily, heavily into regulating the grain trade. They were mainly focused on the price of grain and making sure that bakers got grain at below market prices. So that is one way they controlled the price of grain. And then also famously, they gave, in Rome anyway, they gave bread away to a lot of people. And this was a way they ensured social peace, that nobody starved. Hundreds of years later, 1,000 years later, the Pope tried this in Europe and had the papal annona, used the same Roman term. And what it did, because it was subsidized, they were subsidizing the price of a bread. They had a bread that had to be a fixed size and a fixed price, is they went bankrupt, literally bankrupted the papacy, and because it's very expensive to subsidize that way. Charlemagne, 794, it's not exactly the Assize, but this is the beginning of the re-centralization of the European politic. And here he says, if you want to sell it as bread, he was trying to regulate the grains. Notice the use of Latin measures. A modius of oats is Latin. You know, we think, I think too much because some of these philosophy books, knowledge was lost in what has been called the Dark Ages. But nonetheless, there really was administrative memory, and there was consistency, cultural consistency between the end of the Western Roman Empire and the development of modern Europe. And of course, they were speaking Latin, and language carries culture. So they tried to control the price of grain and said, so if you're going to sell bread, you've got to do this many loaves at this size for this price, which is similar to, but not exactly the same as the Assize. This idea of controlling the price of bread by subsidizing it, that they did in Rome, that the Pope got bankrupted in the 18th century. Well, Jordan ended bread subsidies just recently, just a few years ago. And the next day, of course, bread went up 60 to 100%. So subsidies is really expensive. And I think what's really important to keep that in mind is that when we get to the Assize, they did not, there's no state money involved. Now, the United States also is involved in an annona. I'm an American, so I will say we, since my tax money is going to these farmers. We have put in $32.4 billion between 1995 and 1910. So that's only 5 years, only 5 years, $32 billion price supports for wheat farmers. Now, I haven't looked into this before. I just sort of thought about that when I was preparing this talk. So I don't know what that means for how that affects our consumer bread prices. I did read that, as in general, economists say that price supports give you a higher price than you might have otherwise. Clearly, it must offer some kind of stability, because I actually don't know why our bread and grain prices don't do this jumping up and down as radically as we see the grain market. Now, some big concepts underpinning the Assize. And again, it's also the broodsetting, the bro tax, the taxe de pain. This is, you'll find it in all the most European languages. So it was to help the poor. And you were doing this by regulations, by regulating for a just price within a moral economy. And this is really important, and I think really important for us to be thinking about now as we have this 1% society where there's just this calamity, all these people are out of work, but for Jeff Bezos, you know, billions and billions and billions of dollars has been put into his personal bank account through in the last few months while other people are out of work. So this idea here was that we all lived within a divine structure. It was fairly static. Remember, they just had the Garden of Eden as the model for how the world was made. And St. Thomas Aquinas, who was writing in the 1100s, just when these were made, talked about this idea of a just price. And then later economists refer to this as a moral economy. So what the idea here is that this grain trade remained private. So there's no intervention in normal times. During wars and times, there was intervention. So it remained private. So that's like us now, where we're living in the world of private prices. But price stability was not the goal. I think it's really important that they weren't trying to even out these ups and downs. It was just to negotiate a fair price between us, the consumer, and the baker. So the laws controlled the rules by which bread was manufactured and sold, and it ensured social equality. And what they felt was, Aquinas felt was, if a baker got really, really, really rich, it would be at our expense. So that would be stealing. So everyone agreed the baker should live well, better than a landless peasant, not an impoverished person, but that there was a limit. Now, there were concepts in this Assize that underpin modern regulations: exact weight and accurate descriptions. You had to sell the bread at the exact weight the law said. It could be bigger, but not less. You could give your customers more, but you couldn't short them. And it had to be exactly described. If it said it was wheat, it had better be wheat. In other words, you get what you pay for. Underweight means being cheated. And in the modern world, our modern regulations in the EU and the US and in Kenya, all over the world, this concept's applied also to other products. So if something is labeled 100% cotton, the law is it has to be 100% cotton. If it's 3% polyester, a way to think of it is it's underweight in cotton, and you can go to jail for that. And then the second part is that this was a regulated monopoly, that if you would like the right to have a monopoly, which where I live in my community, the cable for the cable TV or this internet is from a regulated monopoly. So if you want the right to operate in the territory, the exclusive right, then in exchange for that, you've got to give something up. And the bakers gave up unlimited profit. Now, there's a slightly different sense of the world that underpins this regulation. So I mentioned before, we and our breads each have our place. So I'm a proud craftsperson. I'm the baker. And I know we have bakers here who are clearly proud, Jeff and Michael. I don't sense in either one of them that they're just wishing that they were making $5 billion, that they're not proud of the kind of shop they have and the level of their lifestyle. They each had our place. So we fit, though, in this case, more cosmically, like the farmer that we talked about in the Ligier talk. The baker had his or her place. Women did inherit bakeries. Had his place baking for the common good, part of the machine, like a hive, a beehive, you know, where the worker bee has its purpose, somebody else has its purpose, the queen has her purpose, and we go about our business for the best of all. And then the breads also were fixed in that social setting. So we're going to see with the Assize, there's the whole wheat bread, there's sort of an everyday bread that is more white than whole wheat, but not completely white, and then a completely white bread. And those would have mapped to social status. Now, our culture celebrates Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Apple Computer. You know, and each of these men, and Apple as a company, they each are worth more than many countries. And you know, and that's my money and your money. You know, I mean, this is all on an Apple computer and, you know, an iPad here. And you know, our society hasn't been asking these questions lately, but we're beginning to. Is this fair? Is this right? Should we be organized more for the common good? So the Assize is a regulation, a regulatory system that explains the manner how bread can be sold, where it can be sold. So it could only be sold in bakeries, or for you could sell to a jobber. They were mainly women, and they bought bread from bakers and they sold them in the village markets and the town markets. And this, you know, where does the baker's dozen come from is just one of these most asinine and stupid, you know, online ad infinitum arguments. In the Assize law, it was stipulated that the jobbers would purchase 12 loaves of bread and the baker would give her 13. So that's where the baker's dozen come from. That's the profit. It's a small profit, but presumably it was pretty guaranteed. They also regulated horse bread. So in this time, horses ate bread. And I wrote a paper about that for Gastronomica, and I think I might make that into a lecture, because there's so many insights that I got into our what they called man's bread from horse bread. So the bakers also made horse bread. Part of their pay was the bran, and the biggest ingredient in horse bread is bran. So, you know, if someone wanted white bread and you got to keep all of that, you know, all of that bran for yourself, half the weight of the grain, you know, this was how you fed your family and built your, you know, your life. So the horse bread was sold at bakeries, but it was also sold at inns. Every place there was an inn. It was understood, and this is really central here, I think, to St. Augustine's concept of the fair price, of the just price, is that the transaction was transparent. And the price of the bread was based on the local price of grain in your local market, And you would just look at the table. We're going to see these tables soon. You could look at the table, you would know what the price was, and then you just come down here and you say, for this amount of money, I'm going to get a bread that is of this size. And you knew the amount of money because the strange thing for us about this Assize table is that prices were fixed. So prices were fixed. So you could buy a bread for 1 penny, half a penny, and before inflation aided away at the beginning for a quarter penny, called a halfpenny. But you've seen how the prices went up and down. What gave was the bread. So the loaves went up and down in size. This thing was tested every year. And what I'm understanding also from the medieval conception of the world, it was important for the leaders to show that they were taking care of the poor, that they were taking care of us. They go to buy grain, get it milled, bake it, and set the assize every year also reinforced the sense that people were being taken care of. Those of you who don't know anything about, who are not commercial bakers, never talked to a commercial baker much, commercial bakers do adjust their recipes when they get new batches of flour. And I'm talking about really big bakeries. So this Assize established a clear protocol for producing the regulated bread, and of course, punishments for people who committed fraud. And the fraud they were most concerned with was underweight bread. It doesn't seem like adulterating bread was an issue. Adulterating bread became a big issue in the UK, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, late 18th and 19th centuries, where people were putting chalk and bone into the bread to make it whiter and extend it. But they didn't seem to do that. It seems like clearly an easy way to cheat if bread's being sold by weight, just add something that's heavy. And I think that tells me is that it was a fair enough table. They made a living. They didn't need to cheat that way. So here's the principle again. The weight of the loaf varies inversely as the price of wheat. So this also shows you my research method that I recommend for everyone. I actually found this when I was word searching on the Frankfurt Capitulaire 74 to find the Charlemagne bread regulation. But this is a math problem. And it says when a bushel of wheat is sold for 34 shillings, for example, and the bread made for it sold for 6 denarii per loaf, one observes the weight is 12 ounces. If the same bushel of wheat is sold for 28 shillings, how many ounces must be put into each loaf to sell for 6? That really says it all. It's a simple regulation. It's really, really easy. It's really, really easy. Now, they worked off of the number 2 grade wheat, and it was specified a wheat that weighed 56 pounds per bushel rather than the 60 pounds per bushel for a number 1 grade wheat. So you need to imagine you go there with your penny, your half penny, your quarter penny, and what you're buying is that money's worth share. That money's worth share of the grain that the baker buys. And the baker was buying grain and taking it to the mill to grind, and then it was coming back to the bakery and the baker was sifting. And I know we're going to hear, I think, from Jeff and Tony and maybe a couple others who are going to show us about sifting later. I'm going to get to that in about 15 minutes. So when you looked at this table, you were also seeing the agreed upon price, what you paid the baker for their salt, for their dog, for their cat. You're going to see this later when we get to the recipe section. It was itemized what were the legitimate expenses and how much they were. And it was accepted that there would be a profit on top of that, on top of the direct expenses. And so you knew when you got your penny, really that the price, that profit was loaded into the price of the bread. But it was considered a just price, so you said that was fine. And it's really important to realize one thing this really did is the baker couldn't, they couldn't all get together because, they had these exclusive areas, eventually, turned over to the guild, the baking guild had. They didn't buy up grain when it was cheap so they could make a fortune and jack up the price when it was dear. This law really, really spoke against that kind of work because it didn't do you any good. You couldn't make any more money. So this is a regulated monopoly. Only bakers had permission to bake. I've mentioned the horse bread. And they got to keep the brand. So it's similar to what we have, in an electrical market. I know I live in California. Pacific Gas and Electric is the monopoly, and they are not allowed to increase and decrease their prices, anytime they want, and they're under real strict control from the state. And the state even has a say on how they operate their their lines and are actually threatening them with lawsuits for operating them badly and causing fires. When the Assize began, there were lots and lots of breads. And unfortunately, I'll say unfortunately, all the descriptions always being at the beginning, maybe it's the most romantic. You've got the waistle, the small cocket, the large cocket, the simnel. Very, very soon after this, very soon after the beginning, this is something, a law that went on for hundreds of years. There were just three breads: whole wheat, middling, and white. 100% extraction, 75% extraction, and 50% extraction. Extraction means if you start with 100 kilos and you take nothing out, you still have 100 kilos because you just run it through the mill. Your milled grain weighs the same as your unmilled grain. That's 100% extraction. If you sift and the weight declines to 50 kilos from 100 kilos, that's 50% extraction. It's simple. And those were the basic three breads. When we get to the Roman breads, I'm going to talk to you and hopefully convince you that the same three were there in Rome. You're just simply looking at the ancient history of bread. For those of you who are milling yourself, I just want to emphasize that a 56-pound bushel has smaller seeds than a 60-pound bushel. So it has more bran in relation to the endosperm. So if you're looking at what the sensory qualities of the finished flour would be like, a 75% extraction from a 56-pound bushel would be the same as an 80% extraction from a 60-pound bushel. I know that's really detailed, but some of you I know are milling. Yes, they were punished if they were underweight. And the underweight amount, there was usually like a 2 shilling grace, and 2 shillings is about 38 grams. So that's about 2 ounces, less than about 2 ounces. And 2 ounces out of a 10-pound loaf, it's nothing. So it was expected that you were accurate, but accuracy in bread was expected from bakers. We know that forever. It's very clear from Egypt, Rome, Greece. Bakers always had to be accurate, and there was not a lot of fraud. There was not a lot of fraud. It's very colorful. We love these pictures. So there's, I think, way more writing about the punishments than they deserve, because after all, if you pollute a river by dumping chemicals into it, violating one of our regulations, then you get a fine or you go to jail. When did it end? Technically, it ended in 1706 in the reign of Queen Anne, when a new assize was enacted that only lasted about 120 years, went out in the 19th century. And the new one was, they said, look, what we just really want, please, 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 we're telling you, but it was a please. In your bakery, you have to have this one cheaper loaf, this one price-controlled loaf. It was the quartern loaf, and I'm going to do it as a separate talk. And it had a fixed size, 4 pounds, and it got bigger and small, and the price, rose and fell with the market. So it's what you would expect. But I think this thing ended hundreds of years before 1706, because what we see is that inflation really ate away at the wheat prices, and the loaves got smaller and smaller, so that people were getting loaves that weighed 2 ounces. And, people lived on bread, 6 ounces. You can't make a wholemeal loaf for your family and be buying 8-ounce loaves. That's, 200 gram loaves, or even a kilo. It's too small. People ate between 1 pound and 2 pounds of bread a day, 500 grams to a kilo a day. So you needed a lot of bread. So I suspect that at some point, bakers just began selling bigger loaves at some way of negotiating the price with their clients. And the law became honored by being ignored. So I'm now going to move into the recipe. And before I do that, are there any questions so far? Any questions so far? We're good? Nobody?
I had a question about the bread words that we talked about in an earlier class. And so do you have a sense of what the cocket and the simile and the waste is? What bread words they are?
Well, they're white breads. So I'll show you on the table how you can tell. On the Assize tables, you can see that the extraction rate for them is about 48%. And the cocket. So those are all in that, so they're all white. We don't know. It's really difficult to figure out what the subtle differences between those breads are. And there's lots of speculation online and in published books. I would take it all with a grain of salt. I think if we as a group, if we wanted to make a working group and work with that JEEK that I showed a bit earlier, we might be able to figure something out.
I'm more wondering about the derivation of those words. I had never heard them before.
I think simnel is French. I don't know them on the top of my head. I would look it up. I mean, best is in the Oxford English Dictionary. If you have access, site license access through a library, that would be the best. But a big unabridged dictionary, a good etymology dictionary.
Thank you.
I have
any other questions?
Yes, I have a question, William. I'm reading the O'Brien books right now, so I've got quite a head full of what was going on in the Napoleonic Wars. But when you think of provisioning these massive fleets for 6 months at a time, et cetera, this must have been an enormous part of the economy at that time. And I'm wondering, there's lots of places there to cheat the government. I'm wondering how much effect the kinds of regulations that might have been in place to serve the British Navy would have affected bread, which was a huge part.
A really good question, Judy. A very good question, Judy. I don't think there were. I think that they were procuring, and they were selling, ship's biscuit. So it's a twice. Yeah. It's a very dense dough. It's a cracker, which would make a good talk. The first time I see the Navy getting interested in its own internal regulations were in the 1770s, where there were some big hearings in Parliament where the Navy tested. I've learned, in fact, most of what I've worked out about flour was the Navy buying vast amounts of grain, having them sifted through different quality sifting, bolting cloths, and of different technologies, and comparing them with the results with what you got with the Assize breads. And they were beginning in the 1770s to say, my God, we're spending, these billions of pounds, in today's money, buying bread for the army. Are we being cheated? And for the Navy, but bread as well as ship's biscuits. Of course, they weren't always on the ship. So I think I think they got interested later in the late 1700s.
I have a question, William.
Yes, Kate.
About the extraction rates, were those also defined in the Assizes?
They were implied, and that's what I'm going to show you when we get to this next section.
Okay.
How I got to where I got. Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
I think somebody earlier had a question about the quarter of wheat. What was it a quarter of?
A quarter. I think it's a quarter of a ton, actually, but it's 8 bushels. 8 bushels is a quarter. So it's a unit of measure. Pint, cup, pint, quart, gallon, bushel, peck, bushel, and then the quarter. And so it's 8 bushels. 8 bushels. Okay. So how I get to the recipe. So in the Assize laws, this is from 1495. This is from, I think, Powell. Again, a lot easier to read it in Powell than to, try to find the original manuscript. So this is from the version 1495. And they wrote years, it's the 12th year in the reign of Henry VII. Sometimes that's all, in the law, it will just say 1287. It doesn't say 1495. So Powell has done that for us. So this is what the baker gets. They get, and the D stands for penny. So they get an allocation of 6 pennies for the wood, 4 to pay the miller, 5 for the journeymen and apprentices, 2 for the salt, yeast, candle, and sack bands, and they got 7 for himself, his house, his wife, his dog, and his cat. So in all, he gets 20 shillings that he gets to keep from the revenue he pulls in from selling a quarter. So that's what he's expected to make per 512 pounds Troy, 440 some odd pounds avoirdupois, and he keeps the brand to his advantage. And remember, he can make horse bread with that. It's good, it's saleable. He can also feed it to his pig, and that also feeds your family. So this is answering, Kate, sort of your question. So if you can see here, I've underlined, and there's percentages. You're looking at the weights. So what you do is you look at the Assize table, and you can choose any one of them. They're all in relation to each other. I work with the penny. And you see what the weight is. And he's got here money weight, and then in some cases it's a slight variant. So there's 8, 270208 for the wastel. And this is bread. These fractional fractions don't, for something that weighs 27 pounds, it just doesn't matter. What you do is, is that the penny household, which is roughly 56 pounds Troy, sticking with Troy. So the wastel's 27 pounds and some change. So if you divide 27 by 56, you get a percentage, and the percentage smaller that bread is, that's the brand that they didn't use. And the water is going to be proportional, but basically that's giving you the extraction rate. Was that clear? Any question, any doubt? Because I want the recipe, I want this to be clear how this works. Okay. Okay. Tony, are you good with that? Maybe Tony's being shy. Okay.
Yeah, I'm following along.
Okay, so what about rye, or not marlin, maslin? Sorry, I did that this morning, which is a rye and wheat mix. What about that? Was it always wheat? No, it was not always wheat. Absolutely not. Sometimes it's rye, sometimes it's a mix of wheat and rye. And obviously, when prices are spiking like that, as we saw, the baker is going to go to a cheaper flour. And there was a system for doing that. I'm going to show you an Assize table, but what you would do, maybe I didn't show you an Assize table. You're going to move down the table. So instead of looking at what the price of wheat was in the market today, which gives you this shrunken loaf, you're going to go down to a cheaper wheat price, and there was an agreed relationship between that and the maslin price or the rye price, and your bread will get bigger again. So essentially you could go, bad times the baker could help everybody out, and you can be certain that they did, by going down market with grain choice, so the breads got bigger. So there are 512 pounds per quarter, and in this Jeek table, he's saying, the example he's using was that the quarter cost 12 pennies. So if you buy a bread for a penny, you're getting 1/12. So this is really important. You've got to, from knowing how much it costs per quarter, and what the penny household loaf is, what its weight is, that's 1/12. So if you divide 12 pennies into 512, you get 42.7 troy pounds. Now, in some of these assize laws and some of the writing says that they also got to keep a couple farthing loaves for their advantage. Sometimes I put that into this formula. So then instead of saying there's 48 farthing loaves that you can, work out on the table, there's 50 because he gets to keep 2. It doesn't really matter when you're dealing with this much bread. So it's a lot easier just to say, allow for a little bit of a wiggle, a little fudge. It doesn't matter because you can't know exactly in any particular year. So there's many years where they didn't get a loaf for advantage. So there's 512 pounds per quarter. There is 12 pennies, to buy that. How much do you get for a penny? You get 42.7 pounds of grain. Is that clear? Everybody followed along? I'm going slow there.
William, I just had a question about the troy pounds. Can you just explain what the troy means?
Well, if you go online, Jenny, you clearly are not buying. You're not buying gold to hedge against a possible market crash. If you were buying gold or buying gold jewelry, gold is still weighed in troy, precious metals and gems. So if you go online, but it used to be gems, precious metals, and bread was also measured in troy weight. And in a way, it tells you how special it was. And remembering our entire weight system is based on how much a certain number of grains of wheat weighs. We're very tied into this grain, and it was like gold. So once you know the weight that you're buying for your penny or your half penny, then the rest is completely simple. So the household, again, is 100% extraction. Now, at some time in the assize, I think that they would have taken out a few percents, 2, 3, 4%, not have all the gross bran in it. And remember, the baker had an incentive to do that, to give you a slightly more refined whole grain bread, because he got to keep the bran and sell it as coarse bread. And the definition of whole wheat flour in the United States, and there'll be something similar in the EU, it does allow for the removal up to 20% of the bran. This is true. Someone can say it's whole wheat. It doesn't the same as whole meal. Whole wheat can have some bran taken out. And I think, later in this system, for sure, they would have had a few percents taken out. But in this time, it's clear from the texts. It's as it came from the mill. So if we start with 42.7 pounds of grain, we're going to have 42.7 pounds of flour, unless we pay a mill toll. Now, sometimes there was a mill toll, so the miller would take out 5% and keep it, which was the classic one. We've also seen in one of the things I read today that the miller was paid a certain amount. We can't know what that is. So there's always going to be maybe a plus or minus, or I guess you can know. But you'd have to go into a particular year and work out that kind of a detail, and I think that's kind of insane. I think as a rule they paid the mill toll, so I always subtract 5%. So that gave us from 42.7 troy pounds, we're down to 40.5 pounds. And remember, for the ratios, it doesn't matter if it's pounds, kilos, avoirdupois. And we know that when you bake it in the oven, it's going to shrink. And a standard shrinkage rate is 13%. And you can empirically work that out yourself. I find that in 19th century texts, they mention it. But that's part of what would have been worked out, I'm sure, during the baking trials, like, how did this flour actually do? So if you punch into your spreadsheet, not using algebra, but doing hit and miss, 60% for the water and barm, remember the yeast came from the brewer and was liquid form, the yeast sediment, works out perfectly. You're going to end up with 64.9 pounds of dough. You're going to lose 8.4 pounds when you are in the oven, and you're going to end up with your 56.4 pounds, just like it says on the Assize table. And what's fabulous and fabulous and fabulous is when you do the ratios on, how much the wheaten weighs compared to the weight of the whole bread, and you see it weighs 75% of it, and you type in, reduce the 42 pounds of 7 pounds of, or the 40 net by 75% and use 60% water. Again, it works out. It works out. It works out. And it makes sense that it works out because 60% hydration is sandwich bread, right? I mean, it's the basic hydration for sandwich bread. And also a reminder that I think is also a theme of this talk is the grain has not changed over time. Ever since it was domesticated, the grain is the same. And it's just a natural process. I think that's one reason, why we're still, we're so attached to it. Like, whoa, we can do this natural process at home.
William, your slide, oh, thank you.
Sorry, natural process. So it makes sense that, it's a good thing. It's easy to work dough at 60%. It's what I do for my standard pizza and bread dough. All right, that is the end of this presentation.
William, I have one question. You
Yes.
say how the grain hasn't changed through time. Is that even the case in the United States where they have a higher protein content?
Well, I'm not saying that. So grain is there are more cultivars of grain than any other crop. So I mean, grain, we've been breeding this grain for so long. So there's lots of different cultivars, lots of different strains of it. But whether it has a slightly higher protein content or not, compared to an earlier domesticated grain, it's kind of doesn't. I mean, that's a detail. And what I'm talking about is that the relationship between the bran and the endosperm is the same. The structure is the same. There's roughly the same amount of germ, the same percentage of bran. That part is the same. And of course, we've selected for different baking qualities. But that's been going on for a long, long time. There's letters that farm managers in Egypt wrote to each other. I know my friend who's in Egypt who reads hieroglyphics. He's actually a comparative lit person, not an Egyptologist. But he's found a letter where one of the people in Lower Egypt is saying they're asking for grain from a particular area of Upper Egypt because they like that grain better. But still, in terms of what we're talking about, it's roughly the same. But the hydration could have changed radically from year to year because remember, for us, our grains are like perfect. The farmers know what the weather is. If something bad's going to happen, they can whisk it out of the field before it rains. They can dry them in silos that heat it. We have good conditioned grain. So in the past, there would have been grain that sprouted in the field, for example, might have changed the ratios some years. Okay, any other question? Does Mark Miltonville want to say something? Am I seeing that in the chat?
No, I'm good. Thanks, William. I was just enjoying listening.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Jeff, does anybody want to share what you've done so far? Are you around, Jeff? Are you still in your bakery?
Yes. Let's see. Hello. Let me grab my notes. So actually, I'm in the middle of baking, and let me grab my notes here. So that was fantastic. Fantastic. Wow. Thank you for, I think the one thing that I really got out of it was just that we now have a real firm sense of 75% being wheaten flour. I think that's just really important. I think that's an amazing way of showing it scientifically or through math how that 75% came, and that's great. A couple quick points. Just price, I love it. I think it's a great thing to bring up. Welcome to my bakery. There's no one here today. I did bake some bread. These are our prices. $3.50 is our normal size loaf of bread, and tomorrow it's gonna be $2.75. The reason being is that we truly believe that everyone should buy fresh bread and have it, and it should be cheap enough so that despite whoever makes it, they can afford it. And I think, so I love this idea of just price. The one thing I would ask is kind of the social norms of white bread, since we see how white bread is more expensive than whole wheat bread. It goes to show kind of how white bread became ingrained with the idea of the aristocrats, the elite, kind of like the same reason that we serve white rolls for Thanksgiving and Easter, to kind of, that's a proper thing to do. And I wonder how that evolved over time by forcing the price to be higher. It also made it more elite and thus a status symbol, something to think about. What I was able to do is take the actual table that you gave, and I'm looking at the 14 Troy household farthing, the 10 Troy wheaten farthing, and the 7 Troy white farthing. So I used the table. I showed you all my notes online. I basically started at 60% and worked backwards to hit the amount of grams that 7 Troys would be. So a 7 Troy loaf would be 2,880 grams after you add 10% of oven loss. This loaf that I'm going to show you hits at just under 100 grams over. So this is the size of a white farthing. So this is about 100 grams over is all. So you can kind of see the size of it. I cut a little bit under on that size. So it's pretty close though. The wheaten farthing, 70% of it is white flour, 30% I used red whole wheat to kind of get to that 75% household flour look. We are shooting for 10 Troy, which would be 4,105 grams with the 10% excess. Baked off should be about 8 pounds, 4 ounces. This thing hits at 8.6 ounces. So this right here is a wheaten farthing. That's the size of 10 Troy loaf of bread. Fantastic. The last one being the 14 Troy. We're shooting for 11.5 pounds or 5,200 grams. This one comes in just over at 5,298. So I'm just 100 over.
Wow.
I don't even know if y'all can see it.
We can see it. That is great.
So this is 14 Troy of bread.
Fantastic. Just incredible, Jeff. God, thank you so much.
I can't hear you. Wait, hold on. Let me turn this up. There it is.
I'm just saying that, Jeff, that is fantastic. It's brilliant. I think we all should give him a wrap. You take yourself off mute. Really, thank you.
What table is it?
Thank you.
The table is the one that William had posted along with the introduction to his to this course. The one that he has all his notes on, which I'd request a clean copy of, sir. If you could, if you have one that you haven't have all your notes, I'd love to put my own on there. But it was really helpful to see how we were using either 100 pounds and I did find recipes that from the 1800s, 1805, where they used the next step up, the peck, and they were saying you could divide that. So, I mean, you can see how large these loaves are, but this farthing size is manageable. And I do know that we have medieval images and like even French images from the 1600s of loaves that are, you know.
Oh, wow. That's brilliant. That's brilliant, Jeff. That was brilliant. That was a brilliant connection you just made. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. So, I mean, we see them. This is not a, you know, this is something that we can see. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
What I'll do is I will upload to the Facebook group the complete books from Skeet, Powell, and Penn Techman, and then you guys can just download the books, and you've got the full texts.
So one thing that I have worked with is the Assizes of Boston in the 1750s. They're really available online if you look at the old Boston Gazettes. And the thing that I like about those Assizes for North American bakers is that a lot of times they will give like a penny loaf that is half rye, half corn. Or it'll say, you know, it'll basically give you the formula. So you can type in no more than this much rye, no less than this much of corn. And so you actually can work on colonial era recipes by reverse engineering the Assize, which I've done, and I couldn't find those notes, but I did find a bizarre email that I had with you in 2010 between you, me, and Ken Alba that I totally forgot about. So I guess we've known each other for a long time.
Okay,
Just
yeah.
forgot about it.
Well, that's great, Jeff. So maybe post something or in the Facebook group. I don't know anything about those Assizes, so that's
There's a lot of neat ones
I'll
out
be in
there.
touch.
So
That's great.
yeah, this was fantastic. A lot of good information. And also, if anyone was interested, I didn't catch who was interested in ship's biscuits. I do have a published paper on ship's biscuits that's incredibly well resourced and has a great bibliography. And I'll post that up for whoever was talking about ship's biscuits. But I do have quite a weird background in such things. So
Would you want to do a court? Would you want to do a?
yeah, I mean, yeah, it'd be
Talk on
fun.
it?
We can do that. Would be easy. That'd be easy.
Okay.
Sometime in January would be beautiful after the holidays. You know.
Okay, let's do it. We'll sign you up.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank
Thank
you.
you.
And I'll post pictures of these finished loaves. I posted pictures of the loaves as they were done rising. So now you can see the finished loaf. So excellent.
Thank
How
you.
fun.
Thank you.
This is so much
And
fun.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Thank you. I'm glad we're still having fun. So if if you're not a member, join my Facebook group. It's Bread History and Practice, because Jeff has posted a whole bunch of really, 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 really detailed notes on what he was doing for these breads. And the last thing I want to say is we don't know anything about how they're decorated. So I think his reference of looking at the size and looking at a picture is good. And I have wondered, was there competition between bakers? Even though the prices is fixed, you clearly make more money if you sell more breads. So I'm thinking that there probably was competition, and you know, care with the recipe and the way they were presented probably did make a difference. And lastly, I would be remiss for not saying that in certain periods in English history, some people were only licensed to sell white bread, while others were only licensed to sell brown bread. They were also required to stamp the breads so that if you got turned in for underweight bread, you could get found. But I really think those are not really important to understanding why bread was important or how it functioned. So now let's get to making them. Everybody ready? Who's mixing bread in their kitchens? Let's get to it.
William, I have
Yes.
a question. This is Hedja.
Yes.
I am going to try to use, I don't know if people can see this. It is a bread flour mix that was ground by a baker. I bought it at her bakery. And so it's kind of brownish. It has some bran in it. And I was wondering which of the recipes I should use.
Wheaten.
The wheaten.
That sounds good. And I don't know if Amber is here today. Amber Lemke, are you here today? I do want to say that the flour, Amber is Maine Grains. She sent me 50 pounds of what they call sifted white, which is a 75% extraction flour. That is just divine, man. I mean, I have to pay for it next time to order more. But go online, she sells online, and it is not just good for these reenacting loaves, it's just good for everything. The flatbreads from it are over the top. It's just a great flour. And this really was the best flour. I think the white bread was for company meals, fancy meals.
Could you give the name again of the?
Maine Grains.
Thank you.
Maine Grains. I'll put it in the chat.
William, I had a question about, you said how the breads, did they taste all the same even if, say, the yeast barm came from one area versus another? Didn't that vary the flavor some?
Okay, Jenny, very good question. Very, very good. Very smart. Very good question. So first of all, these are all yeasted 100%. There's no sourdough. And you can see yeast is allocated as one of the expenses, and salt in all of these Assize records. When these things started, Mark, you talk about it.
Well, my answer to that one would be, in the first place, it depends on how you're getting your yeast from the brewers. There's two ways of getting it. You can get liquid balm, which will have a beer flavor to it, which you're supposed to wash out. So you wash your yeast, you put some cold water into the balm, you let it settle, you pour off the liquid, you pour some more on, you do 2 or 3 days washing. So the way you wash the balm and how you do that will affect the flavor of your bread. It'll have a more or less malty or slightly beery flavor. And the same thing is, you at some times of the year, you'll be buying your yeast from the brewers dry, because they dry it on the inside of wooden bowls and buckets to give us what we think of as powdered yeast. So yeah, the straight answer is that can affect the flavor of it at any point, yes. And depending on what the composition of that brewer's yeast is. Yeah, because you do tend to get a mixture. We were learning from the sourdough guy that all yeasts have a profile. And so, yeah, again, it will taste different.
And the period that, thank you. I just also want to add is during this earlier period, the ale, this is ale, top fermenting ale, was not hopped. And then the hops came in by around 1500, they began to be hopped. And then more and more, as time went on. And then the yeast got bitterer and bitterer, and that became a problem. But during this period, because at some point you can't wash out the bitter taste. But at this period.
And yeah, so what William's saying, we get our first hop ales or hop beers coming in around 1400 or so. But even before that, different regions use different bittering herbs to make their ale bitter. So again, that's going to change depending on what your brewer uses as his bittering herbs. They will have different oils and profiles. So yeah, it's why we have 6 bakers in a town and we all like one. It's what William said at the start. Good bread is what you like.
Yes. Sorry, I'm trying to set up that the Miller's meeting afterwards, trying to make sure it works. Mark, why don't you do a talk on the brewing? That sounds really interesting, because we could actually.
I'll see what I can do. Yeah, if there's enough, it might be quite short because, and of course you were alluding to some beer breads as well in early cultures, Harappan and Egyptian beer breads, which we don't know an awful lot about, but we can mention them. Yeah, we can do 15-20 minutes on the connection between bakers and brewers, because you say the assizes that you're talking about are the assizes of bread and ale, aren't they? Most of the time.
In English, it was bread and ale. That's right. Yeah. That's right. And historically, they were together. The brewer and the baker were physically in the same place. The brew house and the bake house. Gervais Markham in The English Housewife, when he describes what you would build when you're building your fantasy estate, it was a brew house, bake house together. And of course, those of you who've seen models like at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York of the models from Egyptian tombs, the brewery is on this side of the room. There's a wall, door through the wall, and the bakery is on the other side. So these things do go together. When a Lithuanian peasant woman taught me how to make rye bread, she followed it with kvass, which we made in the same barrel that the rye bread had been made in. How are people doing mixing? Is there much bread making going on here? Any other questions?
William, can I just point out that Mark's actually going to give a talk for us in a couple of weeks at New and Gristmill, online, obviously, on our brewing project that we've been doing here for the last couple of years. So,
okay. Could you guys post this to the bread group so I can make it an announcement and stick it?
I will do my best.
Yeah.
It's becoming embarrassing that I'm giving so many talks across America in the next few weeks.
It's great. So
there's one as well in New York.
And any of you giving talks, anytime you're giving a talk, if you post it to my bread group, or if you somehow, I get distracted. I've just learned the announcement feature. So I'll make it an announcement so it sticks. And again, anybody in the group who has a specialty and wants to talk for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or even the entire class, that's fine. Not just fine. I mean, I would like to hear from other people, learn from other people. Okay.
Hi, William. Is it okay to post one of my songs on your group?
Yes. What would you like to post?
It's just a song. I'm collecting folk songs.
Oh,
that
right,
mention
you're
bread.
back. Yes, of course
Yeah,
you may.
yeah. Haven't been here for a while.
course.
I've actually been baking bread in real life at a local forest school. So in England, we have these things called forest schools where the kids, they do it's almost like bushcraft, and we've been campfire baking today. So it's been so lovely to do something in real life.
Good. Wonderful. Yes, and welcome back. Do you want to tell people what your project is in the last?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, it's called Eat, Bake, Sing, and we get together and we bake bread together and we make music. And when people ask me, how long do we need the bread? I just say, well, for the length of the song. And while we wait for the dough to rise, we just have music as well. So, yeah, that's it really.
All right. Well, thank you.
I have a question. Mark is giving a talk tomorrow on chocolate, or on Saturday.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to not be in Los Angeles. So that's the Southern Californian Foodways Group,
Right.
whatever the name is.
Culinary Historians of Southern California. It's a very big group. It's a very good group. It's a good group. You should have a couple hundred people.
I was supposed to be in LA for this one, which is a real shame because I haven't been back for a few years. So I was looking forward to going, and now I'm going to be sat here instead.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, I have a real short-term memory problem. It's hard for me to keep track of these talks being mentioned. So please post to the bread group because the point of making a community is to share and help each other out and to learn from each other. And that is one of my purposes. It is now 10:30. So thank you. I will be leaving this room open. The Miller's group is open. So I'm going to put the iPad in another room in the past. So anyone interested in sort of the bakers, millers, culinary historians go there. And hey, Chung, you've got a group open as well?
Yes, but I called it the baker's room.
Okay, so the baker's room is Hey Chung's room, and then this room then is going to be for more people with other specialties. It can be baking, but milling, the museum people. And so go off and network if you like. Say goodbye. Bye-bye, Mark. And you can stay here with me. I will leave this open for half an hour.
And can Hey Jung please put the number for the link in for the bakers group?
Yes, I'm doing that right now.
Thank you.
One problem we're going to have here, I think, operating this here is the stupid waiting room. What does this say? No, I'm not, don't want to end the meeting. How do I, I don't know how to. They've made it so the waiting room is on automatically, and I'm not sure how to
William, if you go down under the settings, you can turn that off.
I'm on the iPad.
Oh.
It's always something. Well, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. If that specialty room doesn't open, then go over to Hey Chung's room.
So,
and you can always make breakaway rooms. Okay, Homer, did you have a question?
I wanted to ask a question about grain. Nowadays, our grain here in the U.S. anyway, and compared with the grain of the era of these assizes, the question is really, we speak of hard and soft wheat and red and white wheat. And so how, in that two-dimensional, the 2x2 arrangement of hard, soft to red, white, where would those 200, 300, 400 year ago, 500 year ago grains fit, you think?
Well, red and white is the most important ethnobotanic categories for wheat, I'm pretty certain, from at least the time of Rome. So from 300-400 BCE, and now. So red and white is the most important distinction. So it's about the it is just about the color of the bran coat. So if I was a white baker, then I would be sure to be buying white wheat, because then it is the whitest. And I can tell you, when you sift it yourself, milling and sifting yourself, as I'm doing, with very similar system, or same system, just electricity. I can get the wheat, I can get the flour to be just as white as what I buy as commercial flour. I mean, just a smidgen under with white wheat, but with the red wheat, I can't. But the hard and soft there's actually two different kinds of hard and soft. There's also milling quality hard and soft that you can tell by biting the grain. But Tony, I shouldn't be talking. Tony, can you talk about grain qualities?
Oh, Tony, yes. The other Tony.
Yeah, sorry. Tony Shahan. Maybe not.
Well,
Tony, do you want to answer? Okay. Well, anyway, there are grains that are softer or harder, and that affects the milling of it. And then we also have hard, soft in terms of the gluten content. So we speak of,
sizes don't specify, at least as I understood what you were saying.
no, it's just the grain. Yeah, and it's the number 2 grade. Remember, the number 2 grade.
So William.
Yeah.
Oh, I would say, after our last talk, I posted a map of where white and red wheat varietals are grown in North America from the miller I buy bread from, the flour from.
Okay.
And it just shows you that, like, just the idea for me is just that certain parts of the country didn't have access locally to certain types of grain. You know, that some of our most regional baking is based on this type of flour that can be grown in that region.
Yes, that's right. You grew up within your region. And, custom, the farmers are making decisions based on the market. So they will, whatever, whatever in Canterbury or in, these different areas in England, it's whatever the local community liked, and what also grew best is what they would have had.
Sure. Thanks.
Anybody else with a question? Anyone want to share anything else about baking or any other issues in bread history that you're interested in yourselves? All right. So, shall we end the meeting then for today, if everybody's have their questions answered? Okay. Well, thank you very much. So I will be back in 2 weeks. I'm going to post the courses, try to do that this weekend, and I've learned that I can do a bunch of them at once. So you can register, for each class at a time. So thank you all for coming. Goodbye.